founder of Britain in Europe. He is a college associate dean at Brunel University. He's a senior lecturer in law and an academic fellow of the Inner Temple. Sounds very good, or whatever Inner Temple means. He has published extensively on suspect rights, criminal evidence, and the European Court of Human Rights, and provides commentary on current legal and political affairs in relation to the UK, France, and Greece.
Thank you very much, Akram, and thanks everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm glad that it's fine. I think I will. I saw how problematic it is, the PowerPoint, so I'll probably leave it for the time being. I'm glad I'm speaking after Alex, because two of the myths that she contested, I will contest, counter-argue, counter-contest in a way. The first in particular, which is what my presentation is going to reflect upon, the case for the recognition of EU citizens' rights. And we disagree, Alex, very strongly on that. I think there is a very strong argument, legal, political, and perhaps more importantly, moral, for the recognition, the unilateral recognition of the rights of EU citizens. I believe that's something that should have happened a long time ago. But let me take things step by step. I mean, I'm discussing EU citizens' rights to illustrate the utter mess, as an example, as a case study of the utter mess in which we find ourselves with Brexit. And let me start with what I think should have happened on EU citizens' rights. As I just said, there should have been unilateral recognition from the part of the UK, ours only from the announcement of the outcome of the referendum. It should have been a categorical recognition of the fact that the rights that people used to enjoy until that point would not be altered in any possible way. And not just from the UK, the EU should have followed suit here. The EU can also be blamed for having also failed from providing recognition of those rights and providing reassurance to the 1.2, 1.3 million Brits in the EU who are in equal uncertainty about what the future holds for them. The same applies to the 3 million EU citizens in the UK. So unilateral recognition, first of all, within hours. The technical detail, they could have left it for once the UK was going to trigger Article 50, which happened last March. And they could also agree that recognition of rights and the other two important issues in the agenda, the Irish border and the exit bill, would be the absolute preconditions for the start of the negotiations per se. The one thing would not exclude the other. Unilateral recognition provides the reassurance to 4.4 million people in Europe was not exclusive of discussing the technical detail, which is inherently a very complex issue later on. So this is what, in my opinion, should have happened. What happened in reality? Let us reverse back quickly to June 2016 and the Leave campaign. Let us look at what Boris Johnson and Priti Patel were saying back then on June 1st. I quote, "There will be no change for EU citizens already lawfully resident in the UK. These EU citizens will automatically," and I place the emphasis there, "be granted indefinite leave to remain in the UK and will be treated no less favourably than they are at present." Fast forward a few weeks after the referendum, the then Home Secretary and soon-to-be Prime Minister, Theresa May, and the then Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond, were in agreement that it would be unwise and it would be absurd to unilaterally promise EU citizens that they can stay without first negotiating with the EU 27. So the leave promises were forgotten, or they were alternative facts to start with, and the 3 million were going to be used as bargaining chips, no matter what the Leave campaign was saying before. We at Brunel, in Britain and Europe, a number of experts, including my good friend Alex, and others from outside who are part of the think tank, we immediately protested. So within a week or so from the referendum, and in hearing these statements, we wrote to the Guardian, and we called upon the government to immediately provide reassurance to all those that might be affected. We set out the moral, legal, and empirical case for the recognition of rights in the formal report that we launched at the British Academy with support of the former Attorney General Dominic Grieve. We asked our students, how do you feel about all this? You know, we invited them to a panel, we had experts there, but importantly, we listened from them as well. And they immediately spoke of a culture of exclusion. One of them, an Italian student, was saying that she was asked rudely in the street to go back home. Another one, who had already studied EU law, was saying that during the referendum, a lot of lies had been said about the EU and what it stood and what it was trying to achieve. But you know, the people, I mean, the people were not to blame. The people did not know. A student with basic knowledge of EU law knew. We presented expert evidence of the huge administrative complexities that were going to be that we were going to face once Brexit Day arrived. We had Jonathan Portes, King's College, prolific commentator on the subject, who said that irrespective of the system that you put in place, thousands of people are going to be on the wrong side of the line. They will fall on the wrong side of the line, and that's an inevitable consequence of Brexit, and that is unacceptable. We provided expert evidence on how Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, that's something that Alex has already referred to, provides a very strong argument for recognition of the rights. The right to stay is a fundamental right, protected by international law, and in that way, it's non-negotiable. So, I mean, it's completely paranoid that we have a negotiation about something that, in reality, if we respect international human rights law, cannot be negotiated away. And I was lucky enough, and we were lucky enough, to make that argument even at the European Parliament, in front of Guy Verhofstadt. You know, we stood up and made that argument. But who is listening? You know, who is listening to that expert testimony? Who is listening to experts these days in the post-truth world that we're living? The government seemed pretty indifferent, and they seem to dismiss all this on the basis, what I think was a pure, quite anti-immigration rhetoric. The government repeated with unceasing conviction that they could not jeopardize the position of the 1.2 million Brits in the EU. But here's the paradox. These people, UK citizens in the European Union, were calling upon the UK government, and there's no doubt about that, to unilaterally recognize the rights of EU citizens in the UK. Because, first of all, they probably could see that this was the moral and right thing to do, but also they believed that recognition from the UK government would also trigger immediate recognition of their rights from the part of the EU. So they were thinking that the EU was going to follow suit. But their calls, and those of politicians from other parties, from outside the Conservatives, generally fell on deaf ears. In some cases, people listened. The House of Lords put a strong fight against the Commons in the debate on the Brexit bill. We wrote to key members of the House of Lords. We heard back from Lord Newby, Baroness Hamwi, who played an important role in that debate, and they expressed agreement with our positions, and they said that they developed similar lines of argument when they spoke in the House of Lords. And they were successful in putting forward the amendments, but unfortunately, these were then not taken forward by the House of Commons during the second reading. We heard from MPs from Labour, from SNP, from the Lib Dems, who also wrote to express their agreement with what we were arguing, from the point of view of international human rights law and shared good, UK-based pragmatism. We got the odd unsavory reply as well. A knighted Conservative MP, that I will not name, suggested that we all, and that was following up on the letter that about 30 or 40 of us had written, some foreign names there. Mine was on top of that list, and I have a very long, characteristically Greek surname, and obviously the first name is characteristically Greek as well. But, his response was, and I quote,
he suggested that we should write to our political leaders in our native countries. I mean, somehow he had figured out that my political leaders were in my native country, back in Greece, Mr. Tsipras, etc. As I said, first name and surname betrayed me there, you know. I was really doomed. And so, might I say, might be my son and daughter who carry Greek names, who were born here, love Greece and Britain, by the way, hold UK nationality and the Greek one as well, and are growing up here, but also in Greece, during these lovely long summers. It's a quite complex world, isn't it? Some formal responses also sounded very much like alternative facts. We got a letter from someone very senior up there, who's a good friend of the university, I should say, who on the one hand was saying that rest assured, Dr. Georgopoulos and Britain and Europe, there is no intention whatsoever. We're not going to throw out the 3 million people from the UK. And I said, thank God, you know, there wasn't a discussion about the rights or what exactly the status was going to be. We were reassured that we were not going to be kicked out from the UK, which was reassuring in a paradoxical way. And then he was explaining that, you know, despite giving the reassurances, that they couldn't possibly go any further and unilaterally recognize the rights, because that was going to jeopardize the rights of UK citizens in Europe. And then, I mean, I should have brought this letter up because in the first paragraph it was saying we have no intention to turn the EU citizens in the UK into bargaining chips. And then in the second, he was saying we couldn't possibly unilaterally recognize their rights because we're going to shoot ourselves on the foot in the ensuing negotiations. And I said, you know, that definitely sounded like post-truth, or if not post-apocalyptic, in one way or another. Now, we must admit that in recent weeks, significant, in my opinion, progress has been made. Finally, eventually. The EU first, it was the EU first, that took the step, positive step with publishing and negotiating guidelines in May, which offer quite enhanced protection of rights. Perhaps not all rights, but the fundamental rights, and a significant number of them, will eventually be protected. And I say eventually because agreement is first of all required. The UK followed suit with what Theresa May called her fair and serious offer, and I published something on UK in a Changing Europe, arguing that this was the fair and serious offer that wasn't, because there were still very important gaps, and there still are important gaps in the protection that has been promised. The first serious problem is the cut-off date, so we still don't know whether it's going to be in March of 2017 or March 2019. The issue of family reunification, which is being discussed quite a lot about. The issue of family mobility, and I made up that notion, to be honest, so the fact that, you know, you could have your relatives visiting you with, you know, frequently with no problems, without the need to get a visa, as the case might have been before. The question of the administrative processes that we will need to put in place, and also the enforcement mechanisms, a potential role for the Court of Justice of the European Union, which the UK has rejected quite categorically. Now, even if these loopholes were covered, and I'm trying to be optimistic, I do think a lot of these things will be corrected eventually. I think the more serious risk will lie, and already lies elsewhere, and I will be concluding with that. From what we can deduce from this whole debate on EU citizens' rights is that political expedience, and I mean it's not a terribly original conclusion, but political expedience seems to be more important than facts in this case, more important than law or morality for that matter. The government seems to be passionately committed to the anti-immigration agenda. The 100,000 net migration pledge is still in place. You have groups like ultra Brexit groups like Leave Means Leave, which wants the pledge to actually be adjusted to 50,000 net migration per year, and a number of other very stringent requirements like the 35,000 salary for instance. And you see where I'm going with this. what is even more worrying than the specific facts and the specific requirements that people are going to demand are put in place before anyone from Europe or anywhere in the world is going to be able to come here, is the hostile environment that is progressively being put in place. Dozens of cases, if not hundreds of cases, where the Home Office asked EU citizens already to depart from the country. Logistical mistakes in some cases, the willingness to create a hostile environment in some other cases. We see that informally already stricter immigration controls are being enforced in airports. I mean, my mother-in-law was visiting the other day, for God's sake, and she was stopped in border control for 15 minutes, asked where she's going, how long she's going to stay there, and who is she visiting. And I don't think, she's a EU citizen, there is a legal basis for that. And it has become, and there is concrete evidence about that, it has become much more difficult for EU citizens to rent a property, open a bank account, or find a job. I think an article in this month's Prospect is the perfect illustration of the rising threat that I'm seeing here. It is authored by Norman Lamont, former Chancellor of the Exchequer, and it's titled, "Brexit is rooted in the ground beneath our feet." Now, you might be mistaken, I was mistaken, you might be mistaken in thinking this was a call for a pragmatic approach, the ground beneath our feet, and driving away from misguided idealism on the question of Brexit. But no, the author meant the ground beneath our feet quite literally. Loyalty to where we're born is what creates the space for democracy, he explains, before attacking those self-styled citizens of the world who irritate because their claim conveys an aura of superiority. My cosmopolitanism is superior to your parochialism. The author explains that loving one's country is natural, then adds that an artificial country like the EU cannot inspire the same loyalty as an individual country. And who says that it can? And what's the problem with that anyway? And then he concludes that the nation state, the love of one's country, in other words, is why many people voted for Brexit. I don't know, and I'm concluding here, but I'm feeling a little bit lost. I'm trying to add EU citizens, or non-EU migrants for that matter, to this equation, and I fail quite spectacularly. So I wonder, can I be part of the space of democracy? Can I, Dimitrios, be part of the space of democracy? And can I have loyalty to this physical space, even though I was not born here? Or should my loyalty to the country where I was born take me back there eventually? Am I politely, discreetly asked to go? And should my kids that I mentioned earlier on, who were born here, and as I said, paradoxically, love Greece too, should they have a loyalty to the UK only? And what does loyalty mean precisely? I'll have to leave you with these questions. They're utter nonsense, call them bullshit in my view, but I don't have an answer to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think we'll start to, we can discuss later, but I think we'll open the floor up now for questions. If we can have the lights up a little bit so we can see the audience as well. So who would like to kick-start with a question? Susan. Wait for the mic, I think.
Gentleman second to the left, you said that you were upset about what was.
Sorry, left us. You were, or left from here? Yes.
To my left, yeah.
To your left, so it should be.
Yeah, the gentleman. You said that you were upset about what the reasons were for the Brexit outcome, for instance, and so on and so forth. What about things like voters' feedback? Surely that has some kind of way in. And if you look at for instance, the election of Trump, when you look at voter feedback, a lot of the voters that voted for Trump said that they were concerned about the Black Lives Matter movement, for instance. And if you look at what happened with Trump, you'll see that he won the college vote and not the popular vote, which is obviously, there's a distinction between the two. Obviously, the college vote is linked to slavery, the popular vote is linked to liberation, for instance. So surely voters' feedback holds some weight, and the voters' feedback was about taking back control, immigration, and so on and so, which were really prepared as to why they voted to leave, for instance. So do you not think that they're important elements?
Oh no, absolutely. I don't disagree with any of that. The point is, with the Trump election, there's losers' consent. So if you were on the losing side, you get another crack of the whip 4 years down the line, assuming he lasts that long. Okay. My point about nobody knowing as yet why votes were cast as they were, or at least the interpretation of that, is that, of course, the question was not about, in the referendum, the question was not about immigration, the question was not about the single market, the customs union, the rights of EU citizens living here. It was a question about whether or not we remain in the European Union or not. And the concern I have is that, yes, I mean, almost certainly some element of voter feedback. But the point is how that result is subsequently interpreted. All elections are, to an extent. I mean, the Liberal Democrats, for example, used to be real beneficiaries of voter feedback. They were the sort of party of protest. And then when they were in power, they became the sort of the scapegoat following the coalition. So yeah, absolutely, voter feedback. But the beauty is, with an election, you get to do it all over again. And if you don't like Donald Trump, you can vote him out. Now, I don't disagree at all with you on the Electoral College, but all electoral systems produce some kind of bias, and of course, that bias can benefit both sides, not just one side or the other. The Electoral College does strike me as being woefully outdated, but it's not the only. It's
outdated. It's based on Brexit.
Well.
It's sort of states.
Yeah.
States.
Yeah, that's as maybe, but the point is that all systems produce that. I happen to think that the Electoral College is worse in that respect, but everybody knows the rules when you go into an election. And if you don't compete in the swing seats, if you don't campaign in there, then you're going to lose, because ultimately, in all systems, it's seats that win elections, it ain't vote share.
Okay, thank you for that. So I think there's another question there.
Whilst on the subject of vote share, when people scream about the will of the people, what they tend to forget is the referendum was close. In fact, it was within the margin of error. And therefore, my analysis would be that a logical conclusion would be a gradual exit from the EU.
I don't think so.
Well, the problem is, and I'll have to agree with Justin here, with pleasure, that the referendum didn't. The referendum did not create any scope for that. It left a nation divided in two. I would say the fact that the discussion very much revolved around fiction, the 350 million, for instance, deterred us from looking into the substantive questions and the procedural questions, and how the whole process might operate in the future. I mean, to take just one illustration, there are hundreds of thousands of pages of legislation that we now need, EU legislation that is, that we now need to incorporate into our national law. And we said, that's fiction itself, that we will be able to do that by March 2019. And how are we ever be able to do that, even if we give our ministers all the powers that Henry VIII would have even not ever imagined. And I mean, these questions we've never discussed in the referendum, I don't think. EU citizens' rights were not discussed, supposedly because everybody seemed to agree that there wouldn't be any problem with EU citizens. And yet, here we are. I mean, my fundamental concern about Brexit is that, here we are in October 2017, the referendum was, 15, 16 months ago, and yet we haven't made much. We have made very little progress. I mean, that's what the EU says, but pragmatically, we haven't even we haven't even agreed on the fundamental preconditions. You know, the border, the Brexit bill, and EU citizens' rights. Let alone making all these reforms, substantial they are, radical, that will be required if we are to, you know, give effect to what the people were promised, to take back, you know, control, but in a structured and coherent manner.
You see, what I kind of tried to argue for, and what I have seen in this last year, is confusion, and in my view, we don't disagree a lot. I don't disagree a lot with Dimitris. What I suspect we disagree. I don't think that that Britain should leave the EU, and I do believe that Britain should recognise EU citizens. But I think that there is a difference, in my view, between my view and what I think Britain should do, and what are the legal right according to international law, the legal threshold. So I think that these two seem to be all the time confused together. And if I may disagree with my good friend, you know, even when he was talking, he was saying legal right and morality. Yeah, okay, in morality, I do agree that these rights have to be given. But a civil servant would say, what is the obligation, the legal obligation that the UK has? And I think all these, you know, law, morality, politics, have been somehow used all together as a mass, without really giving to all of us, being separated in order to understand where we stand, and then make our decision on where we stand. And this is the same for me between activism and academic opinion. So as an activist, I'm going to sign all the papers that Britain and Europe has in order for EU citizens to stay, because I think it is the moral thing to do. But as a lawyer, I have to see, even though I don't like it very much, I have to make sure that I don't demonize unnecessarily the state of the UK.
I mean, this relationship between legal rights and morality, I mean, it's very complex. It's not a one-to-one. And yet the legal rights are well defined. We know what they are. But then that extrapolation is very, very complex. So I think we have another
question here. Sorry, question here.
Go on.
Okay. Yeah, you said that, or you gave the impression, I think, or I understood it as, that you believe that the ECJ should have jurisdiction over EU citizens in this UK country when it's exited the EU. Now, that would give those people more rights than those people born in the UK that are only left with the UK legal system, surely. And that, surely, is not in any way right or correct, because there is no country, I believe, in the world that offers something like that to its own citizens, to have less legal rights than foreign people. I'm sorry, it doesn't seem right.
Okay.
How can you justify that?
Yeah, so the question is to me. First of all, I didn't say that the Court of Justice of the European Union, sorry?
I thought the lady just did say that, yes, because she believes in it.
No, actually I didn't. So I think that you know, we can both. No, I didn't. But what I did say, and what I will say, is that these rights, and this is where all the difficulty comes from, is that these are, a lot of the laws of the UK have been created with respect to the EU law. So they originate from EU law. It has nothing to do with who's going to be able to go to the court, but what it has to do is that the court, it is going to be very difficult to interpret all these laws without actually taking into account what its original source says, and how its original source interpret these rights. So if I made the impression that I said that the EU citizens should be able to continue to go to the ECJ, whereas the non-EU citizens should not, the British citizens should not, no, I don't believe that, and hopefully I hope I didn't say that. But if I believe that the ECJ still will have a role to play, I think that it is inevitable that it will have a role to play. I think it is inevitable for my students not to know how the ECJ has interpreted the concept of discrimination that is in British law, because the concept of discrimination has been elaborated a lot by the Court of the European Union.
The UK wants to initially take on the EU laws, so that they basically on day one are the same. UK law, EU law is basically the same. Now, that means that for those, whether the UK citizens or foreign citizens or EU citizens in the UK, their rights are equal. And there should be no way an ECJ, a foreign entity, other than the world level, should have any influence or say on any person living in that UK state.
Okay, so how does the International Court of Justice, so why does the International Court of Justice have such a say? Why does the European Court of Human Rights? Why does the United Nations monitoring bodies, we're talking about more than 7 bodies, nobody has talked about this. They only try to attack the European Court of Human Rights because this is, plan B, some people suggest. But nobody has said to the British people that, guys, it's not just that court. We are bound, and there are loads of judicial or semi-judicial bodies that the UK is liable to and has to respond to.
I 100% agree that the international level, world level, global level, how you want to interpret it or describe it, that is correct. It does have jurisdiction, if you like, on the UK. But I don't think any foreign state, small state, like the EU, should have.
Yeah. No, you made that point clearly. So maybe Dimitris could respond,
yes.
And then, I know we're well over time, but I will accept a couple more questions. So those that haven't, maybe they should also have it in their mind after Dimitris answers.
Thank you very much for your question. Let me highlight the irony, if I may, first of all, that the UK citizens do not want to be subjected to the rulings of the Court of Justice of the European Union. And now are we going to protest because the EU citizens might be? One of the main reasons, apparently, we believe Boris Johnson and others in the Leave campaign for leaving the EU is partly that we want to take back control of our own laws. And so we don't want to be in the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. Perhaps a bit more seriously, I didn't say that the Court of Justice of the European Union should necessarily retain its jurisdiction, and I agree with you. It would be quite strange, to put it simply. Having said that, it's the big sticking point right now in the current negotiations. The European Union and the EU 27 are quite concerned, for their own reasons. They must have some good evidence, take the Home Office blunders of the last few months as evidence or as indication of why they might be concerned. They need some sort of neutral or outside enforcement mechanism, and not just the jurisdiction of the UK courts. Perhaps a final point on the level playing field between UK citizens and EU citizens. Again, a very reasonable claim, a valid point. But let us take a pause. The EU citizens right now, they haven't been offered automatic recognition of UK citizenship, nothing like that. They've been offered a quite special in-between status between UK citizenship on the one hand and non-EU citizenship outside of EU migrant on the other. We're talking about settled status right now or permanent residence. And so by definition, as a starting point, they're not where the UK fellow citizens are. They're citizens of the same nation, but they do not necessarily enjoy the same rights. even if you think, by taking this as a starting point, that UK citizenship obviously offers much more protection. And if you look more carefully about the various differences, it's mainly, I think, the issue of family reunification, which is causing a lot of distress to UK citizens. The fact that if a UK citizen wants to bring a spouse from outside, they need to meet a particular financial threshold. Well, let's not make this a race to the bottom. Just because it wouldn't apply to the EU citizens, it doesn't make it right for that to continue to apply to UK citizens. Perhaps the debate might be, given where we are, that this should be removed altogether. It shouldn't apply to UK citizens either. But of course, with a 100,000 net migration target, it's not going to happen.
That's right.
Any person in the UK has a right to UK law. Any person, doesn't matter where they're from.
Could we have someone else?
Okay, well, come on. So,
yeah, I mean, I'm kind of bemused by some of the commentary. I mean, appealing to the International Court of Justice and demonising Britain in those terms that has been done, it just bemuses me. I mean, look at the countries that don't take any notice of those standards. Saudi Arabia, now even Spain. For God's sake, to a degree, Kosovo, etc., etc. So I just find that a little bit kind of actually fake news itself. It's false rhetoric. I'm sorry, but it really is.
thank you.
And in terms of your Dimitrios' commentary, there is a fundamental flaw in this. That according to my view, Article 50. The European Union is honor bound to actually negotiate everything. The future relationship, it says. And that doesn't just mean the things that you want. That means trade relations and everything else. And that's implicit in Article 50. And the European Union have been actually, completely at fault in their rejection and their structuration of kind of, demonisation and intervention in the press and so on and so forth. We've seen so much nonsense from the EU without actually according to the actual kind of negotiated position that we insisted upon with Article 50 and the implicit rejection of that it's anti-democratic. And that's fake news too. Because nobody's telling the truth about this. Article 50 says that you have to debate the future relationship, and that implies in all respects.
Yeah.
And then you can't defer trade negotiations till after you've got your divorce settlement. And there's, as the civil service made quite clear, there is no divorce settlement in the treaty obligations at all. And in fact, there is also an obligation that past investment in capital investment should be reimbursed to Britain. And nobody's discussing that, and nobody here is discussing that.
Okay, thank you
So
very
I
much.
would say we'd have a one-sided debate in my view.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So I think we'll take we'll couple that question with two short questions here. So because we're well over time, so maybe somebody could take it there quickly. So a mic there. And then another question there, and then we'll answer them all together.
What I would bring to the panel is appropriate for Alexandra and for Justin. I am an attendee of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Poverty and part of Reverend Paul Nicholson's Taxpayers Against Poverty. And what was quite shocking for me to attend the first meeting in Parliament was that how very good research facts have been presented to government, that are the truth, but have been completely ignored by this politically induced forging ahead with austerity. And I feel that you have a good point, Alexandra, that we have to remember that there is international law as well, and people have a right to dignity. They have a right to have food in their bellies and shelter. And when we're in a situation where we've got food banks and women struggling to get their sanitary wear and things, we have to say, what is happening to our society? Because a society without compassion ceases to be a society.
Thank you very much. So one more quick one. So keep it short. So it's a question.
I'll keep it short.
Thank you.
Another question.
question. I want to step back a bit about truth and facts. I think truths are important and facts are important, but I think what we lack or last for some time is not those, is wisdom. You know, strawberry is not a fruit, but it is put in fruit salad. Tomato is a fruit, but wisdom is not to put tomato in fruit salad. And what we need to generate in the world all around is wisdom, but they must be based on facts and truth.
Thank you very much. So if you could, thank you, to quickly address some of them.
Well, I mean, you know, who would argue for poverty? I mean, you know, and I can't disagree with anything you say. I guess to bring it back to the point I was making earlier, is that if self-evident, if the evidence, and I haven't seen it, so I don't know if it's true, is being ignored, then we have, and you know, we have a duty, we have a share in the responsibility to ensure that politicians listen, right? So my point, and to pick up a point that earlier, was not to blame individuals, but to say that we share, as citizens, a responsibility for making this work. And the wrong approach is to sit back and say it's all down to the politicians. So thanks to the work that you do, that gets challenged, right? We have responsibility as citizens. We can't sit back and say these politicians don't know what they're doing. We have a responsibility to make it work. So I don't disagree with any of that. And we have a voice, we should use it. But also call out people when they're saying, when they're talking nonsense.
I mean, I apologise to everyone who had questions and hands up, but I think we've reached the end. Sorry, we're going to be around afterwards, so you can certainly ask questions to the panel. But I think we've reached the end of our time. So I'd like to thank all the audience who have come. I'd like to thank all the panel members here as well for being a part of it.